All right, the man, the myth, the legend, Eddie Radosevich, Sooner Scoop, joins the show. Eddie, thank you so much for taking the time.
I appreciate it, Mike. How's it going? It's been a minute. Seems like just yesterday you were down in Norman. We were getting ready to kick off, the start of the SEC play, and it's been a journey, to say the least, for Oklahoma here over the last couple of months.
Yes, and I made the mistake, Eddie, of hopping on the Oklahoma bandwagon. I like to do things that are unpopular, and I just look like a giant asshole, as per usual. But speaking of that, I did want to start with this. What are the odds, Eddie Radosevich? You got a massive following on social media. You do a hell of a job. But what are the odds that you leave Twitter and announce it that you're going to Blue Sky?
That would probably be 0%. That's one of the social media platforms I just have not. I don't know. I'll be late to the party if it ends up blowing up. But no, I'm gonna stay on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it. Do a little gram every once in a while. Still don't do the Snapchat. I think I missed that boat just from a demographic standpoint. But I love Twitter. It's good to mess around, and if you just remember that a lot of people are just kind of fake out there and just having a little bit of a troll session, it's a lot easier to take it all in. And after 13 games of Oklahoma football this year, if you can survive that on Twitter, you can survive anything.
Yeah, and you would know well better than I, but over the last 2 years, I've come to find out there is a ton of Oklahoma fandom, trolls, whatever you want to call it, on Twitter, and they're one of the best fan bases on there. So I've enjoyed the engagement.
Very passionate fan base. And I think that, that's one of the things that we talked about right when Oklahoma joined the SEC, is that I think that there's a lot of people within the Oklahoma sphere, or whatever you want to call it. Their passion lines up with the best of the best in the SEC. And obviously, as we roll into the spring and 2025 and the start of the season, there's a lot of people that are going to have opinions and concerns about the Oklahoma football program.
Yeah, so let's talk about the fans for a second here. You've got an outstanding pulse on the Sooner fan base, and I hate to even ask this, but this is kind of the reality here. What's more upsetting to Oklahoma fans, going 6-7 and losing to Navy in the bowl game, or Texas, God forbid, winning the national championship? What would upset them more?
Man, I think you have to stay close to home in the 6-7, and it's not just a 6-7 off year. It's a 6-7 for the second time in 3 years, which for the better part of the last 2 decades certainly hasn't happened at Oklahoma. Double-digit wins is to be expected, and I think that there's a common theme throughout the first 3 years of the Brent Venables era is, if there was one thing that I thought Oklahoma was going to be really solid about when Brent took over, was the fact that everything was going to be a disciplined program. And at the end of year 3, we're still talking about them not doing the small things correctly, and Oklahoma beating Oklahoma. So I think that, that has been definitely a concern. And, so I would say the 6-7, but you can be sure there are a number of Ohio State fans that probably weren't Ohio State fans when Oklahoma went up there in 2016 to Columbus, but they will be cheering for Ohio State come Friday night in Arlington.
Yeah, well, again, I can't recommend to my audience enough. Go check out Sooner Scoop if you're an Oklahoma fan, and hell, if you hate Oklahoma, it's highly entertaining.
There's a lot of hate watching done. Maybe my OU fans too.
I appreciate the fact that you keep it real on there. And sure, in recent episodes, you have been none too kind to Brent Venables, and hell, that's right where I'm at too. He's got to prove it otherwise. How hot is his seat, do you think, in Norman?
Blistering, scalding. They have to make inroads and improvements. Certainly can't go 6-7 again. And I think that there was a lot of things that went really wrong this year that's completely out of Brent's control, just in terms of the injuries at the wide receiver position. Nobody could have expected that. It was catastrophic to a certain extent not to have your top 6 wide receivers by the time you got to the end of the season. But the Seth Luttrell hire was, and hand up, I was somebody that thought it was going to be fantastic. They were going to keep the continuity from what Jeff Lebby was able to bring to Oklahoma, and it just didn't happen. And that's on Brent. And he was one of the first people that, in the weeks leading after they fired Seth Luttrell, Brent stood on, he kind of took the sword and said, I did that. I effed up. That was not what we should have done. But at the same time, you're going back into a year now where you're having to replace both coordinators again for the second time in 3 years, and not just one side of the ball, but both sides of the football. Obviously the Seth Luttrell stuff that was in his control. I don't know how much of the Zach Alley stuff was really truly in his control, just in terms of Zach wanting to go and run a defense and kind of be a man of his own, have some autonomy in that. But at the same time, there's just little things. You hear things behind the scenes that you can see why they're failing on Saturday. And, that's concerning. But to a certain extent, I'm definitely not somebody that wants Brent to fail. I think that there's a lot of people around here, and it's kind of become almost a cliche line around here, is the fact that everybody wants Brent to succeed. I don't think that it's personal in any manner. It's just there's a certain level, a certain standard that Oklahoma has, had for the better part of the last 50 years. That the last three teams certainly haven't. Two of the last three teams haven't lived up to, and I think that's why this past year was so disappointing, because you thought after 2023 things were headed in the right direction. It was a rough start in that first year. You lost some games in the fourth quarter that you just weren't able to execute late and find ways to win. You got to the double digit wins a year ago, and then for this year the bottom kind of fell out. And it's tough, Mike, because I think that, like, defensively and special teams, you could argue they're all trajectory wise going in the right direction. The offense, though, was so bad this year that it kind of covers everything up that they've done and the advancements that they have made on the defensive side and the special team side. So it's a very complicated, I guess, kind of subject when you're talking about Brent Venables. But at the end of the day, I guess it's not complicated. You have to get to 7, 8, 9 wins. And when you look at the schedule, it's not getting any easier from the schedule that they were given when they joined the SEC.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that in a second, but let me ask you about the new offense. Obviously, Ben Arbuckle at offensive coordinator, John Mateer at quarterback, and I've heard you guys talk about, well, the hope is this is Lincoln Riley 2.0, this is Baker Mayfield 2.0, but anything short of that, will that be enough? I mean that, talk about an incredibly high bar. It almost feels like it's already. I know it's a big bonus, it's a big addition, but it feels like if that's the bar, I don't know that that could be met.
Yeah, you're kind of almost setting yourself up for failure, while also kind of taking away from what Baker and Lincoln, and just kind of the oddity of how uncommon that is in college football for everything to kind of come together as it did. But at the same time, I do think that, we've had a little bit of a glimpse of what Ben Arbuckle is. He dropped by the studios and did a show with some of our guys over at Sooner Scoop. You can tell why there's a lot of people that like him, why there's a lot of people that highly recommended him to Brent Venables. Obviously, when you saw what he was able to do with John Mateer at Washington State and the success that they found, even going all the way back to Cam Ward 2 years ago, he knows what he's doing. He's produced really good quarterbacks. And I think that, the development, I don't know how much a month of work he got in with Michael Hawkins and what we were able to see in the Armed Forces Bowl. To a certain extent, Mike Hawkins, I thought he played well in the bowl game, and had a bunch of drops from some freshman wide receivers that have been forced to play that, probably at the beginning of 2024 in August weren't expecting to be playing by the time December rolled around. So they got a tough task. I think the offensive line, certainly they went into the portal. They tried to rebuild that thing a year ago. It didn't work out. It just flat out, they missed on some guys. Some evaluations didn't come out properly. And, they had to end up playing a bunch of young guys, especially on the left side of the line, Heath Ozida, Logan Howland. They did get better, though, throughout the year. And I think that when you do look at this offense going into 2025, the offensive line should be better. And you saw what Bill Beanabo brought in the 24 and the 25 class, with Michael Fasusi being able to hold on to him, as well as Ryan Foje, who a lot of people feel like, could end up being a really close 5-star. So it's one of the best offensive line groups that Bill's been able to bring in since being in Norman. It feels like that offensive line is going to be better next year. And if you can get some advancement, if you can get some better play at quarterback, I think the wide receiver thing will take care of itself. You're able to retain somebody like a Deion Burks. He's coming back in 2025. Jaden Gibson should be coming back from the patellar injury that made him miss the 2024 season. So they have some talent at wide receiver, but it's all kind of, I hope this happens, or, they hope that it all comes together. And we've seen the other side of it when it hasn't been able to come together. So it was kind of a cliche line, and I'm sure that you saw it all year, that how can it get any worse? And then it would proceed to get worse. But Truly, I don't think it can get any worse than 2024. And it feels like with Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer, you at least have a foundation that you go, okay, you think that these guys are going to be able to come in and contribute and be better than what you had a year ago. And we'll see. They do have talent, though. I don't think it's just flat out. They don't have talent. They have undeveloped talent. They have guys that are inexperienced. But at the end of the day, maybe a Zion Kearney or somebody like a Zion Raggins can take a year that they didn't think they were going to play and use that experience for the better. And maybe we'll look back on it and go, it wasn't the worst thing that they had to play as freshmen.
Yeah, and from my perspective, outside looking in, it certainly looks like Oklahoma's got a much better grasp on NIL and what it takes to compete in the SEC. They're doing a hell of a job attracting talent out of the portal. Aside from John Mateer, which is the obvious answer because of his importance, who do you think is the biggest portal pickup that Oklahoma's gotten this offseason?
It's really interesting because I think that like you probably the instant reaction would be any of the offensive guys. They had to kind of rebuild the wide receiver room. All the guys that ended up leaving, they have to replace the production that somebody like a Jalil Farouk brought to the program over the last 3 years. So, they've gone about it in kind of a little bit of a Moneyball way. And I think that they've kind of relied on the numbers. Jake Rosenberg, who was with the Philadelphia Eagles, has kind of run their point on NIL and how they're going to use the money, who they're going to go after, being extremely, I guess, cognizant of not overpaying for somebody and trying to get the market value. So Giovanni Gibson, the wide receiver from Arkansas Pine Bluff, I know that there was a lot of people, and by the way that they've recruited out of the portal, they look at the schools that some of these guys have come from, and I think there's a lot of people that have rolled their eyes. And you hope that you hit on somebody like a Giovanni Gibson. It's going to be really interesting though to see how quickly these guys can acclimate. Obviously, going from playing at Arkansas Pine Bluff to playing at Oklahoma, and all of a sudden you have LSU, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina on the schedule. A little bit of a jump up in competition. So, I've liked what they've done to a certain extent, but again, it's just a bunch of hope, and you hope that these guys are able to come in and contribute. And somebody that didn't come into the portal, but Elijah Thomas, kid out of Oklahoma, Shakota, Oklahoma, the eastern side of the state. They think he could be a dynamic player at the wide receiver position, and it's going to be interesting to see how quickly he can come in and contribute from day one. Good news is he's an early enrollee, like a lot of these guys are nowadays. So you like what they've done on that side of the football. I know that there's a lot of people that just kind of are sitting around and hoping that it all comes together, but defensively, get Marvin Jones Jr., you get Kendall Daniels from Oklahoma State, both guys that are kind of on their final opportunity in college football, at least at a premier institution. And there's a lot of hope that, and maybe not even hope. I think on paper, it feels like OU defensively is going to be pretty damn good next season, despite losing the likes of Billy Bowman or a Danny Stutzman. But you have guys that, they've been able to recruit well on that side of the football. And I think that there's one thing, if you can argue about how Brent's running the program, you can't argue about how they're running the defense right now. That's why I think like the defense coordinator thing, it's not as big of a deal as maybe it was the optics of it, and losing Zach Alley, who was a mentor to Brent Venables was a mentor to Zach Alley, and you lose him. And it just, at that moment in time, it did not look good coming out of the Armed Forces Bowl. So it's going to be interesting, though. I think that the schedule really kind of, I don't know about dampens expectation. Those expectations are never going to change in Norman, but at the same time, I do think that there's a dose of reality that Oklahoma fans had to swallow this year, and it was a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, you referenced the schedule twice, so I got it here. Illinois State right out the gate. I mean, that's pick your score type game. But then, honestly, I think these two games are tricky. Michigan at home. I still don't think Michigan's going to be that good. I don't care what freshman quarterback they've got. But again, that is one I think your fans are going to be pissed if you lose at home. They expect you to win. And then I think that might sound silly, but I think the biggest landmine on the whole damn thing is at Temple. Because that's one where you lose it, he's gone immediately, right? So if you win it by 50, the fans are not. They're going to say, "Well, hell, that's Temple. That's what you're supposed to do." I think those first two out of the first three are tricky for Venables in Oklahoma.
It will be. And I think that, the biggest thing is getting off to a good start because you know what's coming in the conference portion of the schedule. And, I think thankfully in a way they get Michigan in Norman. I assume that Bryce Underwood's going to be starting for Michigan. That would be his first road start, his first road game, just in general. I believe, not knowing Michigan's schedule off the top of my head. So it's going to be kind of tricky. I know that Temple's going to be ushering in a new era, just hiring the Sam Houston State coach. So Casey Kelly, he did a great job down there, taking that program from the FCS level to Division One, and he might be kind of having to undertake the same type of, operation, if you will, in terms of a rebuild, taking over that Temple football program. But I think that the biggest thing for Oklahoma is to find some early success in 2025, build some confidence, and more than anything, just find ways to win football games. And I think that that was something that we talked about coming out of the Armed Forces Bowl is you had a team that had multiple opportunities, whether it be, leading a game at Oxford or being in a game late and fumbling it away in Columbia, that it just doesn't seem like Oklahoma knows how to win football games, which is just insane to think about from where they're coming from in 2017, 2018, 2019, when you're competing for national championships. And I think that that's been the biggest, is this really as bad as it seems? And then you look at some of the positives in the program, and maybe we're all idiots and they're closer than we think they are. But I don't know. Right now, it's a tremendous, kind of having to overturn this thing offensively.
Yeah, and the first conference game is one of the most fascinating, I would think, in the entire conference in the first month, because it's Auburn, it's Jackson Arnold, it's coming back to Norman. Oh, the Sooners beat them last year on the road. Pressure on that one, but I really wanted to ask you, and our Auburn fans will appreciate this. What is your assessment of Jackson Arnold? Because hell, I don't even know how you have one, given the injuries, the offensive line, the coordinator fired, he lost his job, he come back in. I mean, the biggest win, some of the worst performances. What's your read on him? Because I don't. He's like the ultimate wild card, I think, in the SEC next year.
You hit it right on the head. How the hell can you really know what Jackson Arnold is? I think the biggest thing for me was the shock that came with how unprepared he looked at times. And I know that, it's a team sport. There's 10 other guys out there on the field. There's only so much that he can do. But there were times, even in the Tennessee game that I'm sure you were watching, that after those fumbles, you had to take him out, right? And I think that going down to Auburn the week after that, certainly Hawkins and the performance that they had, the pick six that Kip Lewis had, kind of turned the tide. It was an Auburn team that, another team that couldn't find ways to win. I think Jackson Arnold's best football is in front of him. I still think that, unless I'm just a complete idiot, which, to be honest, might be fair, but at the same time, I saw this kid in high school, went down and saw many Denton Guyer games. They were one of the best teams in the state, and they were led by one of the best quarterbacks in the country. What happened to that guy, I think, is kind of the biggest question mark. And to a certain extent, I kind of wanted Jackson to stay at Oklahoma and kind of ride it out. How realistic was that? Probably not very. But I do think that Auburn fans are going to be extremely happy with Jackson Arnold. He has a very good talent about him at the quarterback position. And I think that he's one of those guys that, more than anything, I think his head was just messed up. It was just everything that happened last year happened so quickly. And even going all the way back into 2023 in the bowl game and throwing the 6 interceptions, it was tough. And I think that he started thinking almost too much. And if he can just get a kind of a restart, a fresh slate at a new school, I think he can still play football. And I think he can still play football at an extremely high level. It was just the chips were kind of stacked against him from the get-go. And I think that, looking back at it, it's obviously 2020, the hindsight is. But at the same time, I think everybody just needed kind of a new lease on life, if you will. It's good for Jackson. It's probably good for Oklahoma that everybody moved in a separate direction. And, I think people are extremely excited about John Mateer and Norman.
Mm-hmm. And then the other 7 conference games, real quick. Texas, of course, in the neutral site, at South Carolina, Ole Miss at home, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Mizzou at home, LSU at home. I mean, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I mean, best case of just of that run. I mean, it feels like 2-5. You know what I mean? Or
yeah.
How many? Yeah, that's 7 games. So 2-4, or no, 2-5. I think I had it right the first time. But I mean, again, I'm not predicting that today, but I think that's a realistic outlook as we sit here, knowing what we know about Oklahoma and what we know about these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think that everybody looked at the over under last year when it came out at 7.5, and there was a lot of people, myself included, that kind of scoffed at the idea that Oklahoma all of a sudden was just going to take that drastic step back from the 10-win season the year before. And the schedule is extremely tough, and I think that they're going to have a profound turnaround offensively. Not to say that they can't do it, because I do think that there is some talent there, and there's going to be a lot of people over the course of the summer that are going to basically be saying that Oklahoma's, the worst team in the SEC to a certain extent. But at the same time, I think that we're at a point now with Brent as they go into year number 4 that you have to just kind of almost sit back and be patient. And I know that doesn't do anything for the college football fan that posts on the message board every day and wants to talk shit on Twitter and do all of that kind of stuff. But they got to go out and prove it. They got to be able to go out and say, yes, things have changed. We're a better football team, and we can go score points and get stops and get off the field and win football games. So it's a bear of a schedule. They know what they signed up for when they joined the SEC. They probably didn't know that they signed up for this schedule, but it's going to be fascinating going into 2025 to just kind of see how they navigate these waters, what's still to come, who they hire at defense coordinator. Are there going to be more staff changes before spring football starts? I mean, we're talking now 5 days before everybody's back in Norman and they really truly start winter workouts. So it's going to be a fascinating couple months, and especially going into spring ball, just to kind of get a good first glimpse of what John Mateer is when he takes over this offense.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like we've been just so pessimistic. I mean, on the bright side, I think what you got to do, like you said, get signs of life on the offense. John Mateer, show that flash, or at least be a flash that he can be a star, pull a couple upsets, and then you go into the 2026 with an easier schedule, and you pull what, I mean, nobody thought Billy Napier would survive, yet that's one of the hottest teams in the SEC
Sure.
right now. So, the last question for you, Eddie, I really appreciate your time, but how many, just ballpark, just a guess, how many wins is it going to take for Venables to get another year?
I think we've said, I think we've said 9. How realistic is that? I think, just based off the conversation we just had, not very, unless they get a lot better offensively. Realistically, I would say probably 8. They need to show improvement. There's no doubt about that. And I do think, like, again, this, depending on what hour you catch me at, I can be glass half full guy or glass, half empty guy. They're going to be really good defensively. So can you just make some improvements? We're not, and I feel like this is such a 180 from what we used to be talking about with the defense and just getting better, just taking small steps. If an offense can get better, get out of the triple digits in a lot of those offensive categories, and just be somewhere in the middle of the road, I think they can win some football games. They probably would have won for sure the Missouri game this year. And all of a sudden, as small and incremental as it may be, a 7-6 coming out of this year, and all the bad that happened and all the stuff that wasn't necessarily in the control of the coaching staff or the players. Maybe there is a little bit more of a positive narrative around Oklahoma football had they done that. So there's an alley. There's definitely an area where you go, okay, if this happens, this happens, this happens. I could see them getting there. But again, they got a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the football. And that's, I guess, in kind of a sick, disgusting journalist coverage type of way, it's going to be kind of fun to follow here over the next year.
All right. Well, Eddie, I thank you so much. Survive
Absolutely.
the snow. And but before you go, can you tell my audience how to follow you, how to find your guys' work over at Sooner Scoop?
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter, Eddie Rado, EDDIE_RADO, and then Soonerscoop.com. We're with the On3 network. And, it's kind of weird with everything that's happening now in college football these days with the transfer portal. And, you have some of these high school recruiting, bowl games or whatever you want to call them. The Navy Bowl, Oklahoma has a couple guys playing in it. We've had Josh McQuistion down there and covering that. So there's a lot going on. And OU basketball blew an 18-point lead last night at home to Texas A&M. So things are going real well, real swell. And softball season and baseball season right around the corner for a lot of people in Norman.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, I'll cut it right there. Eddie, thank you so much. Reach out
Anytime.
anytime, man. If you need something, let me know.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Mike.